right. A pleasure to have you here today, Mr. Mathew Knowles. How are you feeling?
Charles, I'm doing great. I don't have bad days. My wife and I, we live in sunny Southern California, and every day is a beautiful day. And just to be alive and well, speaking with you brings a lot of gratitude.
Mm, I love that word, gratitude. I think that is something that most people don't do enough nowadays. Being alive, being able to leave your home, come back without any incident, it is just a gift, and people take it for granted too often. I'd like to actually ask you about that. What in your life has made you start to appreciate the smaller things, the basic things, just being alive? What made you start to appreciate that?
Well, Charles, a good question, because when I was younger, I would have answered that differently. Um, it might have been things that were financial, or things, with family, things with the job that were going great. But, 3.5 years ago, Charles, I was diagnosed with cancer, a very rare form of cancer for men, male breast cancer. I call it male chest cancer. And that changed my perspective on life, because I had to make a overall change from every aspect, from exercising and a lack of exercising, changing my diet, to reduction of alcohol, to every aspect of my life. Um, and it made me, that word gratitude, just to, when you look at all the different, in a year, 650 plus thousand people in America, just America, is diagnosed with cancer. And just to be stage 1A, didn't have to do chemo. I'm thankful. That brings a different sense of life for you. The things I used to think were important, aren't as important anymore, as family, as friendship, as giving back to others your knowledge. Those things are real important to me today.
Mm. That's a very comprehensive response. And Matthew, that is very inspirational for me to hear how you dealt with having cancer. Many people would have started to feel dejected, would have felt demoralized after being diagnosed with cancer, especially having lived a life when you did not have cancer, and to now have to adjust to it after being acclimatized to a life without cancer could be something that's really difficult. But something that you just said right there also stuck out to me, where you say that it forced you to actually have a bit of self-introspection, start looking at the way that you were living your life, start choosing to make more consciously healthy decisions, such as like you say, you started refraining from taking that much alcohol, you started to eat more healthier things, just started to take better care of yourself than you were doing before. And that is something that to me appears to be a blessing in disguise. So I actually wanted to ask you more about that. Besides the situation with cancer, are there other things within your life which have appeared negative at first, but then at the end of the day ended up being some of the best things that ever happened to you, a blessing in disguise?
Well, I do a lot of public speaking around the world, Charles, and I normally end with a story, true story. I was in LAX airport going down the escalator, and at the bottom was a nun from Mexico. And she had a jar handwritten, please give to the missionary. And I gave, and she gave me a business card. Back then everybody had business cards. And I didn't read the back of it for months. And I finally read it one day. And to answer your question, it said, pray not for a life free from trouble. Pray for triumph over trouble, for what you and I called adversity, the universe, God, Allah, whatever name you use, calls opportunity. So the prayer was, in adversity, there's opportunity. Even with my cancer, it gave me the opportunity to share my story around the world and hopefully save someone's life. even in business, when mistakes were made, and we look at those as opportunity to grow when we make mistakes or things don't go like they were supposed to. Even today with setting up this interview, and we had to do it 3 times. It's possible that this is the better one that came from a mistake, right? So I look at the world, I look at life that way now, that failure is an opportunity to grow. I look at adversity is there's always good things inside of adversity and opportunities for us.
Mm. Several pertinent things that you touched on there. I think one of the most important things that is very underrated that you said right there is that within adversity lies opportunity. You cannot have a solution without first having a problem. You cannot have a triumph without first having a trial. And then there's another thing that is very key that you said, which I've found to be very true in my life as well, where you touched on how our attitude towards failure sometimes is wrong. We feel as though if we fail, then maybe that's the end of the road. But then failing is actually a good thing because it allows you to learn. It allows you, as one wise gentleman once said, if I fail, I'll fail better next time, up until I get it correct. And, you know, this actually segues perfectly into what will be my next question for you regarding some of the failures that you've had. But before we jump into that question, I was actually going to share a personal story of mine, which had to do with adversity as well. You shared yours about cancer so politely. I lost my parents when I was very young. I think when I was 12, I lost my mother. The following year, I lost my father. Then the subsequent year, I lost the very last of my grandparents. So by the age of 14, 15, give or take, I lost all parents.
Wow.
Four grandparents and both sets of those grandparents, as well as my parents, my mother and my father, was a very difficult time. But that adversity, that's what has built the man you see in front of you today. So what your words, they're very touching to me because I believe adversity, even though it can be a very difficult thing, it can actually help to build people. But then back to the question that I wanted to ask you, what are some of those failures that you've encountered in your life and what have you learned from those failures?
Well, I have to say I was so engaged in what you were just saying and really connecting with empathy. I've lost both of my parents, but certainly I was not a kid, a young man when I lost my parents and grandparents. So just to hear you say that, thank you for sharing that with us. If I was there right now, I'd give you a big old hug and tell you I love you, brother. Because I know it hadn't been always easy for you. So ask me back the question because I was so engaged with what you were saying. I apologize.
No, that's all right. So the question was regarding failure, and it was about how you have learned from failures that you've encountered, as well as what type of failures have you encountered that you can remember right off the tip of your mind.
Well, I've had a lot of failures. You know, we often see people that have had successes and don't realize that we've had more failures than successes. Gosh, I've done so many things. Like I never forget south of France. They doing a film festival. They call on major talent to perform, and the year previous, Usher had performed, Mariah Carey had performed. So they asked Beyonce this year to perform, and it was a huge check, like $2-3 million for a 45-minute performance. And we went through her booking agency, and then everything went well. And then the media come from nowhere that the production and the producers of the event were the Gaddafi brothers. And that brought a lot of media attention to the point that Beyonce ended up giving her money to charity. I ended up giving my commission to charity. But what it taught me, I had always depended on the agency, the booking agency, to look at the background of who the person that's paying. As a manager, I had never done that. After that, subsequently after that, trust me, I always want to know about the person writing the check. Where before it was just how much was it, rather than who was writing the check. And so that's just one thing I always think about that always just come top of mind as an example of a failure that made me a better manager.
Wow, that is quite the ordeal you found yourself in there. I can only imagine. Like you said, you had a positive outlook on it. You decided to learn. And I think that is indicative of your humility, because most people in that situation would probably have been prideful, either prideful or they would have been pitiful, one of the two, but they wouldn't have chosen to learn from the situation. Yeah. You chose to learn from the situation, and that is very reflective of who you are as a man. And I definitely find that to be admirable. Looking at all of that, that makes me think about your role as a mentor, because clearly, just speaking with you right now, I can see why you are a world-class mentor for musicians and other talented people all over the world. I can see why, because you have so much to offer and you have the right attitude, the right mindset. But I want to ask you a little bit more about your role as a mentor. What really made you so captivated to assume that role for different people all over the world? What made you want to be a mentor?
Yeah, mine's kind of fell in my lap in a way. I was in corporate America, Charles, for 20 years. I had given myself the goal of only being in corporate America for 20 years. And literally the 20th year, I left corporate America. But something happened in the marketplace called managed care, where now we kind of understand when you go to the hospital, the cost. Well, I was I worked with Johnson & Johnson as a neurosurgical specialist. And so I got a call from one of my neurosurgeons. He couldn't use my instruments anymore because of the cost. And I called my former wife and friend, Tina, and I said, I can't do this job anymore. Anybody can sell cost. So I had to look deep, deep within myself. What was my passion? Well, in Houston, a young rapper had asked me to manage him. And I was like, I've never managed. I don't know anything about that, you know. But then I realized I did know a lot about management. And so at the same time, and I don't believe in happenstance, I believe in the universe. At the same time, Beyonce's little young girl group, Girls Time, was on Star Search, and they lost. And the host of the show, I said, well, what do I do? I'm just a dad here. These kids are crying their hearts out. And he says, he named all of these artists that had been on Star Search, Boyz II Men, Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera. He went on and on. Aaliyah, they had all lost. They all lost, these top artists. And he said what they had in common, when they went back home, they changed their organization. And that's when I decided to go back to school, because I believe knowledge is power. That's when I went to every music seminar that you could imagine. And I would be there asking every question that I could, passing out business cards and trying to build a relationship. That's when I decided to go into the music industry. It was those three things happening at the same time. This young rapper asking me to manage him in Houston, Beyonce's girl group losing on Star Search, and me getting the call from the surgeon saying he couldn't use my instruments. All happened within 2-3 weeks of each other.
I see. So a number of events just all came together and culminated in you making that decision. Having made that decision, though, did you ever feel like there was a bit more of a risk factor in your newfound career than the previous one?
Oh, it's a much greater risk. But one of the keys of being highly successful And I talk about this in one of my books, The DNA of Achievers, 10 Traits of Highly Successful Professionals. I have a whole chapter just on risk taking. Like we have to take risk if we want to be successful, and we want to really move the needle. And when we think outside of the box, we're going to take risks. We're going to do things that no one else has done before or attempted to do. And it might fail, and we'll learn from it, but also it might succeed. And the more times we take the risk on the same topic, the better we become at it. Every time I speak on the stage, every time I would talk to any of my artists, I would be like, hey, tonight, let's take some risks. Let's tell the audience to jump up, have them jump for 5 minutes, see if they'll do it. Let's take a risk and see if it works. So you do those things and see if they work and if you can grow from them.
Wow. That is an answer that definitely made me start to change my approach to risk as well. I think I wouldn't classify myself as a risk-averse person, but I would say that I am very aware of risk. By profession, I'm actually an actuary. So an actuarial scientist, I work with figures, with risk analysis, all those other things. That's something that I do by profession, but I'm also a generalist, as you already know, with us having the interview. So I am very aware of risk, but your particular analysis of risk, your perception of risk is very refreshing. You're not too worried about it. You acknowledge that there is risk, but you're not going to make it stagnate you. You're not going to make you timid. And I think that is something that is key that a lot of people struggle with when it comes to risk. The risk just freezes them. They don't make any forward motion or attempt things out of the box. And that is sometimes very detrimental. You remain safe, but as you're remaining safe, you're going to stay in the same position in perpetuity. So what you are saying there about telling the artist to tell the audience to jump, and that could be something that works, that could be something that does not work. I think that is a good approach to have to a number of things, because it's in those things that you try where something does just happen or something does not happen. With that said, Mathew, I would also like to ask you a follow-up question regarding your mentorship of artists and say, have there ever been instances where you thought you just could not get through to an artist, and how did you learn to find a different way of getting through to an artist? Have you ever had those instances?
Yeah, I've had them many, many times where artists wanted to do it their way. And from experience, and I knew that there was a strong possibility that it would not work their way. And my management style, and we all have styles, is that it's kind of like how we raise our kids, is you tell them, I don't think this is going to work, and let me tell you why I don't think it's going to work. But ultimately, it's your decision. And you've got to be responsible for whatever the outcome is. And I'll be right here to embrace and hold you when you need me. And I've had to let a lot of my artists sometimes fail because they didn't want to listen to my thoughts about how to do something. And I was there to pick them up when they fell. But that's my management style. I want try to continue to convince you of something, because I know sometimes you have to experience it in order. It goes back to what we said earlier, learning from failure. So yes, that's happened many, many times in the music industry. That I said, we'll try it your way. I just want to ask, if that doesn't work, will you try it my way?
Wow. Like you said, it's very synonymous with parenting. Sometimes you do have to let the children try things, and it might be scary initially as somebody who's very attached to them, but you understand that it is ultimately for their own good if they learn from experience perhaps they will understand the lesson a bit better. And what you also said about being endearing, being caring, even if they fail, you're there to embrace them. I think that is something that certainly sets you aside from most people. Most people, when you do make a mistake, they're going to rub it in and say, I told you so. Why did you go ahead and do this? But it's a common theme right now at this point in this interview that you're somebody who is celebratory of failure because it shows you that somebody actually tried. Whereas most people are not as celebratory of failure. Most people demonize failure to an extent where people are not even incentivized to try because you don't want to be told, oh, you messed up. I told you you're going to mess up. But you being endearing, that's something that's quite crucial. And
it has worked both. It has worked both ways, Charles. In that, I give you another example. Solange, for example. You know, when Solange was young, she danced with girls. I mean, with Destiny's Child. And I said this on a post recently. I wanted her to be a member of Destiny's Child. She didn't want to. And when she signed her record deal at 15, 15 with Columbia Records, myself and the executives at Columbia, we wanted to make her this pop artist. And as we know now, that's totally, pop is totally what Solange is not. You know, she's a more intellectual, urban, alternative type of artist. And that first record didn't do well. And then we changed record labels and we got a bit closer and we start letting her make artistic decisions. And then on that third album, Seat at the Table, she blossomed to the Solange we knew. She was right. So that works both ways. Sometimes I've been wrong as well.
Well, so basically offering your artists creative freedom has paid dividends either way, whether it is that they fail and they learn from it, or they actually succeed and discover themselves doing something different.
Correct.
That is quite something.
And you have to take ego out of it.
Of course.
You have to take ego. As you know, Charles, in this music industry, there's a ton of ego. So let me give you a definition of ego, Charles, that you've never heard before. Ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pain of stupidity.
Wow, that is profound. That there is profound. It might seem harsh, but when you really think about it and you break it down, it is very true. Yes. Because you're not going to be focusing on how you're wrong if you've got ego. You're not even going to be thinking about learning. You're just going to be so nonchalant. But again, I appreciate that about you so much. Given your level of accomplishment, it is not so often that you find somebody like you who is as willing to learn and as willing to be humble, because people at that stage in life, justifiably so, may see themselves as knowing a lot more than the people around them. But it seems you're always willing to learn. You don't always have to be right. And that's very refreshing. That said, I was actually going to ask you about how you learn to be as compassionate as you've been. You said you'd be endearing if somebody does fail. And then I also want to know how you've also learned to be as humble as you've been. Is it nurture? Is it nature? What is it? What has made
I think the humility came from failure. There was a point in my life, 12, 13, 14 years ago, that I basically imploded. I won't go into that, obviously, but it taught me humility. It taught me the value of being authentic. I am my authentic self. And what you see is what you get all the time. And when I was younger, and I think when we're younger, and based on our backgrounds, I came from a poor family, yet very, very wealthy in love and wealthy in pride. That's the family I grew up in. And And they were very humble people also. And I just know that as we grow in life, uh, there will be some days that there will be rain, and there'll be days there'll be sunshine. And what I do know is when the sun sets every day, we'll never get to live that day again in our lives. And that's how I look at life today. Today, the sun was set. We will not get to live November the 15th ever again. So I make the best out of
it. You definitely answered that quite well. You touched on several things. Your upbringing helped you to be the man you are today in terms of the humility that you showcase, but then also your experiences later on in life also taught you to be more humble. And again, that again is this testament to your character, because most people having had any sort of experiences which would have taught them to be humble, or which is supposed to teach them to be humble, wouldn't have accepted that. Most people would have chosen to be prideful. And I've had instances in my own life where I've done one or the other. I have chosen to be prideful, or I have gracefully been humble. And being humble is actually a blessing in disguise, because you learn more out of your situation when you do that. When you're prideful, you end up with a lot of resentment, regret, anger, bitterness.
it. Yeah.
And I don't see any of that within you, which is actually going to be my next question. Being in the industry that you're in, I'm sure there are a number of people who would possibly step on you the wrong way, aggrieve you, try to take advantage of the prowess that you might have. How is it that you've been in this industry for this long and you don't seem drained? You still seem to be at the top of your game, still rising. How are you able to be so durable in this industry, not having any bitterness, no resentment?
Yeah.
What is it about you that helps you to do that?
Yeah, I really, really, really work hard, Charles, on gaining knowledge. I really read a lot. I went back to school, got my MBA, PhD, went to many, many, many seminars, music seminars. So when I would talk in the industry, I would talk from a place of knowledge. And when I came into the music industry, it was the record industry. And I came into a different industry. I brought a different industry. I brought in branding, marketing, endorsements. That's the industry I was in. They were in the record industry. That was just the means to build a brand and build a base of consumers that we could sell our apparel to, all sorts of things, as you see Beyonce and Solange are doing today. It's just not records that they do, and how they also touch society and holding society accountable and messaging and giving information. So I understood that. So that was number one. And I think just to go back just a little bit, we'll give some context. When I was in corporate America, and I worked at Xerox for 10 years in a very specialized division, the medical division, I was the #1 sales rep in the world for multiple years. Also, I was one of the first Blacks in America, if not the first Black, to sell MRI and CT scanners. So I've experienced what it means to be the best, and what amount of work and information and passion that's required to be the best. I've experienced that, been on championship basketball teams, on a championship WNBA basketball team. So I understand what's required to be the best. Unfortunately, most of the world has never been the best, and they don't know yet. And I say yet, because hopefully they will one day have the opportunity to be the best at what they do. So when I walked in at those rooms, I walked in with confidence that I had knowledge. I wasn't just talking. And when I was challenged on something, I had backup information. Mm-hmm. And that happened, for example, with No, 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 the first single of Destiny's Child, when there was a part 1 and a part 2. And we got Wyclef to do the remix. And I went in and talked to the presidents and the president and the senior management at the label and told them I wanted to put the remix on the first Destiny's Child album. They laughed at me. They were like, we don't put remixes on albums, Mr. Knowles. We just use remixes to extend the player radio. I was like, no, I've called broadcast data systems, BDS, and asked if we have No, No, No Part 1 and No, No, No Part 2, and the lyrics are the same, will they count as one song? And they said, yes. So I was like, that's how Destiny Child came from nowhere, because No, No, No Part 1 and No, No, No Part 2 was counted as one song versus two songs. So it's that kind of risk-taking, thinking outside of the box, but having knowledge. And when I was challenged, literally the president made one of the members in the room go and get on the phone and call BDS. And they were like, oh yeah, we remember Mr. Knowles calling us. And yeah, no one had ever asked us that before. And so we said yes to it.
Wow.
So then you build a reputation of knowing just what you're talking about. And it becomes easier as you have successes. It becomes a lot easier to have those opportunities.
Wow. You've definitely answered the question and answered even more than I'd asked. And I appreciate that, because it's given me some insight into more of how you think and how you maintain that elite level, being at the top. You've been at the top, like you say, in the corporate world. You've been at the top as well in the sporting world. You've been at the top in the music industry. You're still at the top in those industries, and you're seeming to conquer other areas such as the literary world with your book, and what you're also doing with upcoming podcasts. You're doing a lot of big things as well as documentaries, but then it all goes back to experience. For me, I think that is one of the things that you've utilized very well, because you do not have a binary nature of analyzing your career. You don't just think, oh, the corporate world started here and it ended here. You actually incorporate it into what you're doing with music and sports. You're using all those experiences, and perhaps that's what has kept you fresh and what has avoided you from burning out or not keeping your A status. That said, you did say something about Destiny's Child, which was going to be one of my questions. How does somebody, besides the risk element that you just said right there, how does somebody who is doing this for, I believe that was the first time, it's the same time you opened the world music entertainment, you then thought, let me launch Destiny's Child. Were you sure at that point in time that it was going to be a success, and how did you make it a success?
Yeah, good questions. You know, I believe in transitional knowledge. I believe that the knowledge you learn in one area can be transitioned. For example, what I learned in corporate America, I could transition that into the music industry. I could transition that information that I learned into the apparel industry. So I believe that you can transitional learning, that you can use some of those knowledge points, I call them. So, and with Destiny's Child, first of all, it started with, we had tremendous talent, you know, Beyonce, Kelly Rowland, amazing talent, and very passionate about what they do, still are. And I believe that it all really starts with passion. And do we have that kind of excitement and energy? Because I believe, Charles, that when we live our passion, we don't work. You know, I can't remember the last time I worked, because I love what I do so much. And at this point in my life, if I don't want to do it and I'm not passionate about it, I just won't do it. So I was fortunate to have that, being a visionary also, is critically important here, because when you're a visionary, I used to say, I'm going to leave corporate America to go into the music industry. And most of my friends would be, are you crazy? You're making six figures. Why would you do that? And I quickly learned that one of the traits of a visionary is you never ask anyone their opinion. You ask and tell them what you need from them. So rather than me asking my friends what their thoughts on me transitioning to the music industry, I should have been saying, hey, and one day I'm gonna ask you to tell all your friends to come to the concert. But I was a visionary with Destiny's Child. I saw the potential. I looked at the marketplace. I evaluated the who, the what, the why, the where. Evaluation process I used pretty much on everything. And there was a void there. There was a lot of girls groups, and there was a lot of kids groups back then. You had ABC, Crisscross, TLC. It was all teenagers. But they were coming from a real hip hop perspective, and no one had done the glamour and ritz thing for younger artists. And Tina, my former wife, did an exceptional job on imaging the girls also. So it was a combination of their great music, because it starts with great songs, their work ethics, because what coexists with passion is work ethics, their imaging, and having the right team. And I knew how to build teams because I learned that in corporate America, team building and leadership.
Wow.
I gave you a lot.
You did. You gave me a lot. And I'm loving this about your responses. They're personable. They're very, very, I would say, even intellectual. The way that you break down everything is methodical. When the question comes your way, you're really giving me a lot of insight. It's not just a Q&A. You're really giving me the flesh and bones of what has made you who you are and what has been able to make Destiny's Child what it was, what it is. And perhaps, as I will always say to anyone who will listen, Destiny's Child might go down as one of the greatest music groups of all time, if that's not already something that is stamped in history right now. But moving away from Destiny's Child, each and every one of your children were able to have very prominent careers, probably the ones which are most known, Solange and Beyonce, for being very big in their respective genres. With them rising to that level, did you ever have situations where you thought, I cannot protect them as much as I could before because now they're going to be exposed to the whole world, they're becoming mainstream? And we know a lot of people out in this world, we just offer pressure, unwarranted pressure, inhumane expectations, and it becomes more and more difficult, maybe perhaps as a parent, when you know that your child is now completely out there. It's a blessing, but at the same time, it can be a concern. How did you manage to navigate through all of those?
It's extremely tough, Charles, being a parent and manager at the same time, especially when it's easier if it's just a solo artist, but it becomes even more difficult when it's a group because you have a fiduciary duty to each one of the members. So it never is easy, but again, we built the right team. Even today, there's probably 7 or 8 members that I hired 20 plus years ago that's still on Beyonce's team. So it's kind of like starting a franchise. You have an idea, you have a vision, and you have a franchise, call it McDonald's. You can sell that to someone else because you built the foundation of the franchise. And the same in music. If you build a foundation around the artist, they can change managers. They can then learn to do it themselves because they have the information and they have the foundation and they have the team already surrounding them. So that's where Beyonce and Solange are right now, is they're extremely smart. extremely smart and well learned, and they understand the business aspect of it. And it takes artists a long time to understand the business aspect of it, because the business part is more overwhelming than the actual creative part. Because you can have a great voice and great artist and entertainer and not have the right business team, right record label, right manager, right, attorney. It can go awry. And, those are some of the type of things that I'll be talking about when I get to Saudi Arabia in the next couple of weeks. I'm looking forward to that.
Wow. You built the right team around them. I love that. I love that it goes back to what you learned to do in the corporate world and taking that straight into the music world and learning how to perhaps create something that is long lasting. What you say, that's remarkable. For the team that Beyonce had to be the one that she still has today, at least the core of the team, that is fantastic, because as you know, in an industry as volatile as the music industry, things just get changed very quickly. And a lot of people are disingenuous. They might come for the wrong reasons. And that's why I'd asked you that question about whether it was difficult to protect your children. But it seems you did a remarkable job with that. And perhaps closing out this particular interview, which has been a wonderful interview, I wanted to ask you about the work-life balance. How has it been maintaining cohesion with your family, your friends, as well as being somebody who is doing things that are very big and that are in the public light? How has it been to balance those things ever since your corporate days all the way up until what you're doing currently?
Well, I think it's about consistency, and we've talked about consistency. And for example, you met my assistant today, Lynn. She's been with us for 20 plus years. Beyonce, Solange, been with Columbia Records for 20 plus years. So it's consistency has a lot to do with it, but the work-life balance was the question. And as I've gotten older, work-life balance means something different to me than when I was younger. Again, it's about organization. Tuesdays and Wednesdays is when I do most of my Zoom calls. I take most Fridays off. I do my administrative things on Monday and Wednesdays. It's about allowing myself the opportunity and time. Every other day I walk 2 miles. Now the odd day I'm lifting weights. You have to actually, for work-life balance, you have to actually calendar it. Just like you do at work, you calendar that at 10 o'clock I have a Zoom call. You have to calendar, well, I'm gonna calendar my life balance also. And it's gonna be a calendar for both. And you get on the schedule that this is what I'm doing. And that's how I do it. I have a schedule that these are the things I'm doing. Every night, me and my wife, we're gonna look at some TV, we're gonna find something funny, and we're gonna laugh before we go to bed. That's what we do. Every night we laugh before we go to bed. And you go to bed and you wake up really refreshed because, you just had you went to sleep happy.
Hey, gentlemen, sorry to interrupt. I think we have time for one more question. Mr. Knowles, I was wondering if you could talk to Charles a little bit about your role up at the XP Music Conference in Saudi Arabia.
I was hoping that was coming. I was going to make it come. I had written down. I was going to add that to it. So yes, I'm looking forward, Charles, to the XP Music Conference. I'm really excited. I've never been to Saudi before. I've done research, you've heard our research, and I'm really shocked to know that 2/3 of the country, 2/3 of the population is 30 and younger. Just that alone is amazing to me. And what that says to me is that entertainment has to be a part of a lifestyle. You can't have that many young people and not have entertainment. What I'm seeing, and as I'm researching and having conversations, the XP Music Conference is to bring together some of the world's greatest minds as well as talent, but began to have dialogue on infrastructure in the music community, what's needed. And I'm talking about the music industry in a digital age and how we approach it today. But what I'm really also, Charles, is going to talk about, foundationally, the music industry hasn't changed. We still need great songs. We still need great artists, and we still need great teams surrounding these artists. And what the music industry is not giving today, they're not giving the artist development. Today, artists have to get that on their own. So a new emerging territory that's emerging, they have to work even harder on artist development and creating their own sound. Just like for years, Africa wanted to sound like Americans. And then suddenly one day, America got exposed to Afro beats and said, man, this is the thing, Afro beats, Afro pops. Now Africa is proud. They have their own sound now. And that has to happen in Saudi Arabia. They have, and it takes time. They have to create their own sound. It's not like I want to be like what they're doing in America. You want to be like what you're doing in Saudi Arabia. And Riyadh, you want to do that. So that's what I'm going to talk about, because many times artists want to emulate some other place. Create your own sound, create your own industry, create your own infrastructure. So I'm excited about that. I'm really excited about that and look forward to meeting a number of people and a number of artists.
Thank you very much for the interview, Matthew. It's been sensational. What you just said right there at the end about Saudi Arabia and the potential for growth in that region, which would be similar to what we saw in Africa with Afrobeats. That is something that definitely made me think outside the box and see things a bit differently, because usually we're used to just seeing finished products, seeing a continent that is already doing well. But that could actually be Saudi Arabia in the next few years, like you correctly said there. With that said, Matthew, how can people find you on social media? How can they also tune in to the seminars that you'll be having in Saudi Arabia?
Well, you can go to MathewKnowles.com. I can't make it any easier than that. It's just my name with one T. And you can find out all the things I'm doing. No, my number one passion today, what I do the most, is speaking. And so there's an area you can book me to speak as well. But thank you very much, Charles, for the interview. And for those of you that are listening today, I hope I get to see you at the XP Music Conference. And I hope you learn more about the XP Music Conference and what those weeks, that week of what that experience will be.